What if I told you there's a way to live anywhere in the United States for free or even get paid to live there? If you don't know this strategy, you'll waste hundreds of thousands of dollars on rent or an expensive mortgage payment over your lifetime that you could have avoided if you just knew how to use this strategy. And that strategy is called house hacking, which is defined as staying in one bedroom and renting out your other bedrooms to housemates. Now, you've probably heard of house hacking before, but most people do it wrong and end up losing thousands of dollars every month. Or they bring in the wrong tenant, a tenant who stops paying, and then they have to deal with an eviction. So on this video, I'm going to go ahead and go through some of the common mistakes made and what to do about them to make sure that your first house hack is successful. Let's first go over some of the challenges that you might face on your first house hack. On my first house hack, I had a wild party tenant who created a huge dramatic situation for me. I had just purchased that first property and moved in my first few tenants. And then one day I get a call from one of my tenants while I'm on my lunch break, and he says, "Dude, one of your tenants is throwing a wild Halloween party and invited over 80 people to the house. I don't think that even meets fire code." And not only that, but the police were called because of the loud music that they were playing at the party. Now, I kind of knew that this person might be trouble just from interacting with him. He was actually in my fraternity, and I knew he was a loud party type tenant, but I was so desperate to get in my first few tenants so I didn't have any vacancies. If I could go back, I would definitely be a lot more patient with finding the right tenant, because I'd rather find the right tenant, even though it takes a little bit longer to find, than get somebody who's going to cause me headaches the rest of the year. So now I know to screen them based off of how they're interacting with me, but also looking through their social media, their Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and see kind of from their pictures and what they write, what type of tenant are they. Usually I look for serious college students because I rent out by the bedroom to college students. And so if somebody is addressing me as, "Yo, what's up, dude? Do you mind if I have some of my bros over?" or whatever, something like this, I know that this is going to be a tenant who we might have issues with down the road. The next thing that I do to make sure that we don't have this situation again is to set house rules and to go over them with the tenant on day one. And these house rules are typically like, how many guests can you have over? How long can you have them over? If you have any pets allowed at the property, if there's no smoking, drugs, alcohol, and no wild parties. Another common issue is dividing up the chores. So on day one, I actually have somebody walk through the house with the tenants and teach them how to do each chore, like how to use the washer and the dryer at the house, how to load and unload the dishwasher. And you'd be surprised, one time I had a tenant who didn't know how to use a microwave. So you never want to assume that the tenant knows how to use everything. You want to have somebody to actually go through the property and teach them how to do each of these chores, including taking out the trash, of course, and then explaining the importance of them doing their chores on a weekly basis to make sure that the house remains in good shape, and so that the housemates don't tear at each other's throats. Making sure you set the right expectations at the start will go a long way in making sure your first house hack is successful. Now, the last challenge I want to talk about is tenant versus tenant conflict. So when one housemate is angry at another for doing whatever, maybe leaving dirty dishes in the sink, the first thing that I do is I have that housemate talk directly to the housemate they're upset about. And I will have them explain why they're upset and then come up with a plan together, an actionable plan that can be implemented over the next 2 weeks. And then after those next 2 weeks, come back to me if there are any issues. 95% of the time, 99% of the time, I never get a phone call after that, or I never get a complaint after that. Now, the tenant might argue, why don't you just talk with that guy directly rather than me having to talk with them? The response to that for me is, if I talk to them, they will say that another guy is talking behind my back to the landlord, and they will get even more upset over the issue. So to prevent future escalation, it's really important for the person who's upset to talk directly and have that direct communication with the person they're upset about. However, if there is still an issue, I will go ahead and next talk to the person who's being complained about directly and explain to them how their actions are causing this conflict and asking them what solutions can they come up with to resolving the issue. If that doesn't work, the last thing that I do is, because I have college students, I have parents usually co-signing on the leases. And so I'll ask the parent, hey, can you go ahead and talk with your college kid and help me resolve some of these issues at the house so it doesn't escalate further. Now, most people think house hacking means cramming a bunch of housemates into a single family home. Well, there's actually multiple ways to do this, including ones that will give you a lot more privacy. But the way I first got my house hack, I actually bought this property in Sacramento, California, and I had an extremely low mortgage payment because when you buy a property as a house hack and occupy it yourself as a primary residence, it leads to a much lower interest rate. So I have a mortgage on this property for $2,300 a month, and I rent out each bedroom for $800 per month around. So typically, just 3 bedrooms would cover my mortgage payment completely. And then utilities are split evenly among the housemates, so I only have to pay a portion of the total utility bill. And this allowed me to essentially live for free in one of the most expensive states, California. And I get along with my housemates very well because a lot of them are Sac State students or they're healthcare workers like me. And of course, we went through that whole process with house rules and house chores, etc. So it's a great house culture. Now, the second way to do this is to buy a small multifamily home, like a duplex, which is basically 2 single-family homes kind of put together. So it's a 2-unit multifamily. A triplex is a 3-unit multifamily, and a quadruplex is a 4-unit multifamily. So what you can do for these small multifamily houses is you can live in 1 unit and rent out all the other units. So you still have your own privacy. You have your own space, your own living room, kitchen, dining room, etc., because you live in 1 unit and then the other units get rented out. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about Brandon, who is one of my clients who did this strategy, and you can see up here what he sent to me by text. My client Brandon was able to do this where he bought a duplex in Sacramento, California, and was able to rent out the other unit for $2,800 per month, which was essentially covering his mortgage payment. I think he was only coming out of pocket only a few $100s, but other than that, he was essentially living for free at that property in one of the units with his wife, and so he had all this privacy because he had that whole unit to himself and his family. Now, the final way to do house hacking is at a property with something called an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, where you can live in the ADU, which is kind of like a mini house. It usually has its own living room, common space, and you can live in that mini house and rent out the main house to housemates, which basically cover your full mortgage payment. I had Hyun do this in Texas, and again, she was living in that mini house along with her kid, I believe, and she was able to rent out that main unit to not only live for free, but also make a lot of money on top of that every single month as cash flow. So those are the 3 basic ways that you can house hack. Now let's go over some house hacking perks that most people don't know about that can speed up your path to financial freedom using this strategy. What if you could buy an expensive $400,000 house with the same down payment that most people spend on a used car? Well, it's possible with house hacking because it allows you to put as low as a 3.5% down payment, which means you don't come out of pocket for that much cash. A 3.5% down payment on an expensive $400,000 house, for example, is only about $14,000. And if you are in the military, you can even do a lower down payment than that. You can do a 0% down payment. So one of my clients Ricky, he was in the military and he bought this house nearby a military base and rented it out to his military buddies. And not only was he living for free, but he was making $500 on top of that, which you can see in our text message conversation here. Another key aspect of house hacking is the loans typically have a much lower interest rate, at least 1% lower interest rate, which translates to $75,000 over a 30-year loan term. Most people don't realize that by buying the exact same property as a house hack and living at the house versus buying it as a non-owner occupied investment property can save you that $75,000 in interest payments. All right, let's go ahead and talk about this final piece here, which is running the actual numbers on a house hack. You need to know your numbers first because if you make a miscalculation, living for free can easily turn into losing thousands of dollars every month or buying a property that will never end up being profitable for you. So basically, to calculate the numbers and to calculate the cash flow is you take your rental income, subtract out your mortgage payment, and then subtract out your expenses. So the rental income is super easy to calculate. You take your total number of available bedrooms that you can rent out and then multiply it by how much you charge per bedroom. So if you have 5 bedrooms that you can rent out at $700 per month per bedroom, that translates to $3,500 per month, which is 5 bedrooms times $700 per month per bedroom. So super simple math for the rental income. To calculate out the mortgage payment, what I do is go to Carl's Mortgage Calculator. Carl's is spelled Karl''S, and there's an online version on the internet, and then there's also a phone app that you can download as well. You just plug in your purchase price, your approximate interest rate, and then your property taxes, which you can get off the county tax assessor website, and then of course homeowners insurance, which is usually somewhere between $1,200 to $2,400 per year, depending on what city you're in and how often there are natural disasters in that city. So go ahead and plug in your numbers there, and that will give you your monthly mortgage payment. The last thing I estimate is the expenses. Typically, expenses are 1% of the purchase price of the property per year. And then to get the monthly expenses, you just divide by 12 months. So if I buy a $300,000 property and I have 1% expenses, that means I set aside $3,000 per year for any repairs or maintenance on that property. And usually that also includes landscaping costs, cleaning costs, etc. The last factor you might have to consider is vacancy rate. Usually I assume a 5% vacancy rate starting out. But eventually you might be able to have back-to-back leases, so your vacancy rate is closer to 0. And that's pretty much it. Again, the rental income minus the mortgage payment minus your estimated expenses. So I hope you use this strategy somewhere in the United States to live for free or maybe even make profit while living for free. And if you have any questions at all, please leave them down in the comment section below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with your friends who are struggling with getting started in real estate investing so it can really benefit others. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you on next week's video.